The Earth Plane by Eric Dubay, illustrated by Can-Ev Art. When I was your age, growing up in the country, on clear summer nights, Grandpa and I would lay on the grass watching the stars. My favorite was Polaris, the bright North Pole star, positioned perfectly central amidst the constantly circling constellations, like a noble king on his throne, proudly presiding over his twinkling kingdom. Grandpa taught me all 88 constellations, from Andromeda to Vulpecula, and we would watch them for hours while he told incredible ancient fairy tales of heroes like Hercules and his 12 labors, the prodigal son's journey through the 12 houses of the zodiac. On the last night of summer vacation, Grandpa and I were staring at the stars, when he pointed up and said, "Polaris, my boy, sits directly above the North Pole, which means the exact center point of Earth and the exact center point of the heavens are perfectly aligned. Polaris is like God's eye in the sky, watching over his creation, and the other stars reaching out at different angles are like his angels, bringing light to even the darkest corners of the world. The North Pole is like the base of a gigantic celestial tree reaching to heaven, with Polaris, its highest leaf, on the tallest branch, directly above the trunk. The other stars are like all the other leaves on all the other branches, and every day the great tree in heaven makes one circle in the sky around its trunk, just like every year every tree on earth grows a new circle around its trunk." Our first day back to school started the next morning, with the bell ringing and my new teacher, Mr. Tyson, spinning a large globe on his desk. "Tell me, students, what shape is the Earth?" he asked, looking at us over the top of his glasses. I glanced around to see if anyone would answer, but everyone was expressionless, gawking at the spinning globe like a hypnotist's swinging pocket watch. "Anyone?" he asked again. "What shape is the Earth?" Looking out the window, at the perfectly flat horizon, I remembered flying in my grandpa's airplane and seeing the same flat horizon all around me then. In a moment of confident excitement, I raised my hand and exclaimed, "The Earth is flat!" Mr. Tyson quickly swung his head around, squinted his eyes at me for a second, then burst out laughing so hard that all the other students couldn't help but join in. Embarrassed and confused, I slumped back and crossed my arms. When everyone finally stopped laughing, Mr. Tyson said, "Silly boy, the Earth only looks flat because it is so big and you are so small. Imagine an ant on a basketball. For him, the horizon would seem flat even though he is really on a ball. Earth is like a spinning basketball, and you are like an ant standing on its surface." Mr. Tyson walked to the blackboard and drew a solar system diagram as he continued explaining. "Not only does the Earth spin 1,000 miles per hour around its axis, Earth also spins 67,000 miles per hour around the Sun. Meanwhile, the Sun, Earth, and every planet in our solar system is already spinning 500,000 miles per hour around our corner of the Milky Way galaxy, while the entire Milky Way galaxy is shooting off millions more miles per hour away from the Big Bang explosion which created the universe." Walking home from school, I couldn't stop thinking about what Mr. Tyson had said. If Earth was really a big ball spinning around itself, rotating around the sun, revolving around the galaxy, and shooting off through the universe, then why does the North Pole star never move? Why haven't the constellations ever changed position or shape in thousands of years? Night after night, year after year, Grandpa and I watched Polaris appear in the exact same spot, while all the other stars and constellations always maintained their relative positions to each other. If Earth was really traveling several millions of miles per hour in several different directions, why could we watch every star in the sky making perfect circles around Polaris? If Earth was really traveling many millions of miles per hour in various directions, the star trails Grandpa and I often photographed should have shown irregular spiral shapes, not perfect circles. Upon arriving home, Grandpa could see the distress on my face and asked what was wrong. I dropped my book bag to the floor and yelled, Mr. Tyson said Earth is a spinning space ball. Grandpa and Grandma suddenly both burst out laughing so hard that I couldn't help but join in. "Oh, well then, don't fall off the bottom of the ball, dear," Grandma said, wiping tears from under her glasses. "And don't get motion sick from all that spinning, my boy," added Grandpa, slapping his knee. That evening, we laid awake long past my bedtime, stargazing. "It doesn't make sense, Grandpa," I said, becoming increasingly frustrated. "How can the constellations never change if we're flying millions of miles per hour in several different directions through the universe? If that's really true, then the night sky should look different every single night." "You're absolutely right, my boy." Grandpa sighed, and his usually jovial face turned serious. "I'm going to tell you a secret now. The world's biggest secret. Very few people in their lifetimes ever get to know this incredible secret, and the few who do are usually forced to keep it to themselves. The secret is actually something plainly obvious for everyone to see, but when you try telling people, they just scoff and call you crazy. That is how this incredible but obvious secret has been kept so well hidden in plain sight for nearly 500 years. "Tell me, Grandpa," I interrupted, unable to contain myself. "What is it?" "From the beginning of recorded history, and for thousands upon thousands of years, every ancient culture around the world knew for a fact that Earth was not a spinning space ball. They knew from observation, experimentation, and common sense that Earth is a motionless level plane, and that the sun, moon, and stars all revolve over and around us. They knew the North Pole to be the magnetic monopole center point of Earth, with Polaris, the North Pole star, positioned directly above. They knew, just as you do from years of sky watching, that Polaris is the only motionless star in the heavens, while all the other constellations revolve perfect circles around it." The next day at school, Mr. Tyson continued explaining his version of the universe. In the middle of the blackboard, he drew a huge circle to represent the sun, with 9 smaller circles of various sizes to represent the planets. The planets, he said, were spinning space balls similar to Earth, and Earth was in fact the 3rd planet from the sun. He then showed us a colorful poster with beautiful images of each one. "Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all revolve around the sun," Mr. Tyson said. "The Earth spinning around itself causes day and night, while rotating and wobbling around the sun causes seasons." "Wait a minute," I said loudly, with a sudden burst of confidence. "My grandpa and I watch the stars and often see Mercury and Venus shining bright all night long. But for your diagram to be true, someone on Earth should only ever see Mercury or Venus during the daytime." Mr. Tyson glared at me without blinking or speaking, and slowly raised an eyebrow. The other children murmured, then went silent. "See," I continued, "if Mercury and Venus are closer to the sun than Earth, then we could only ever see them while the sun is out. It would be impossible to see them at night, because Earth is facing the wrong way." Mr. Tyson finally blinked, lowered his eyebrow, then turned back to the blackboard and continued his lecture. He completely ignored my objection and just carried on as though my revelation was irrelevant. Discouraged but not dissuaded, I knew he could pretend nothing happened, but I'd found a fatal flaw in his model, and this was just the beginning. That evening, after dinner, Grandpa set up his telescope in the backyard and called me out to sit with him, asking with a cheeky grin, "What new nonsense did they teach you today, my boy?" "Mr. Tyson showed us a poster with pictures of planets and said all the other planets are spheres, so Earth must also be a sphere." Grandpa's grin stretched to his ears. "Well, that's just silly, isn't it? Basketballs are spheres, but that doesn't mean the court is a sphere. Billiard balls are spheres, but that doesn't make the table a sphere. To begin with, you know something is wrong when you ask the shape of the floor and someone immediately looks up to the ceiling for answers. Moreover, Earth is not a planet. Earth is a plane, which means level or flat. They just added a T to the end of our Earth plane, then started calling it a ball. Have a look here." Grandpa motioned for me to look through the telescope at a bright, blinking, twinkling, clearly circular, but not spherical, yellowish star. "That, my boy, is the planet Venus." "But that doesn't look anything like the picture Mr. Tyson showed us," I interrupted. Grandpa nodded. "They can make fancy, believable pictures using computers nowadays, but they can't stop us from using our own eyes to see the truth. Venus used to be called the morning star, since it is often seen rising in the east before dawn. In fact, all the so-called planets were known to the ancients as wandering stars, because they differ from the other fixed stars in their relative motions only, each making its own unique flower-petal-like pattern over the earth. As you can see, all the stars and so-called planets are just immaterial lights in the sky. They are not gigantic burning balls of gas, spherical Earth-like realms capable of stepping foot on, nor are they millions and millions of miles away, but rather quite close, as evidenced by the amount of detail seen using a mere 83 times zoom telescope." The next day, Mr. Tyson began class by asking, "Which one is bigger, the sun or the moon?" As usual, none of the other students spoke up, so I quickly raised my hand, thinking the answer was obvious. "They're the same size. Anyone can see that." "Wrong again, silly boy," Mr. Tyson laughed to himself. "The sun is actually 400 times larger than the moon. It only looks the same size as the moon because it is also 400 times further away from Earth." Dumbfounded, I blurted back, "You want me to believe the flat horizon I see in front of me is actually curved? The motionless Earth I feel beneath me is actually moving? And the two equal-sized circles I see above me are actually 400 times different size? Just how far away do you think the sun is, Mr. Tyson?" "The sun is approximately 93 million miles away from the Earth," he said, with a slow blink and roll of the eyes. "How could you or anyone else possibly know if no one has ever traveled 93 million miles to prove it?" I asked, with wide-eyed excitement. "Complex mathematical formulas and calculations perfected over centuries by astrophysicists and people much smarter than a pesky little schoolboy, that's how." That afternoon, upon hearing what Mr. Tyson taught us, Grandpa immediately loaded his truck and brought me to the beach. The sun was shining brightly through a few clouds, casting its rays downwards and outwards onto the water like a sparkling pyramid of light. "Those are called crepuscular rays," Grandpa explained. "If you trace the beams of light up past the clouds, they all converge at the sun, just like if you traced back the beams diverging from a flashlight, they all converge back to its source. So what do you think? Does it look 93 million miles away to you?" Grandpa smiled as I squinted my eyes and shook my head. "Even Copernicus, the creator of this whole solar system cosmology, claimed the sun was only 3,391,200 miles away, based on his expert calculations. The next century, his successor Kepler claimed the sun was actually 12,376,800 miles away, based on his even more expert calculations. Sir Isaac Newton, in the next century, was quoted saying, 'It matters not whether we reckon it 28 or 54 million miles distant, for either would do just as well.' So you can see how scientific these so-called scientists were with their calculations. And nothing has changed since then. Over the centuries, using their mathemagic, they have continued furthering the sun's supposed distance to today's current, most expert, super pseudo-scientific figure of 93 million miles. Grandpa grabbed a duffel bag out of his truck, and we made our way towards the shoreline. You see, they can make internally consistent, mathematically correct formulas showing the sun to be 1 billion miles away if they want to, but that doesn't make it reality. Real science must be observable, testable, and repeatable, so that everyone can experiment and conclude for themselves, and that's just what we're going to do." Grandpa pulled a large metal astronomical instrument out of the bag and placed it in my hands. "This is called a sextant, and it is used to calculate the exact angular distances of objects like the sun, moon, and stars. He placed his hands over mine and held the eyepiece up so I could see through it. First, we align with the horizon. Press the clamp to release the index bar, then bring the sun to the horizon line and read the angle. This is how sailors have long used stars to navigate the seas, and how we can know the sun is not millions of miles away. By taking angular measurements in two different locations at the same time of day, then factoring the straight line distance between the two locations, we have two exact angles and one exact side of a triangle, from which we can use the Pythagorean theorem to accurately factor the distance to the sun. Navigators for centuries have used this method and determined the sun and moon to both be only approximately 30 miles in diameter and less than 3,000 miles away from the Earth. As we laid together on the beach, the sun began setting, casting hues of red, orange, and yellow over the sky. I crossed my arms behind my head and asked, "Grandpa, why does the sky change color at sunrise and sunset?" Grandpa smiled, sat up, and pointed to a row of street lights in the parking lot. "See how each distant light looks like it's getting lower and closer to the ground than the previous one?" I noticed and nodded my head. In reality, all of those streetlights are exactly the same height, and only appear to sink towards the horizon due to how our eyes perceive perspective. Likewise, the sun never actually rises at sunrise, and never really sets at sunset. At dawn and dusk, the sun is much farther away from our position than at midday. So from our perspective, it appears to be rising and setting, but is really just coming and going. Now when the sun is farther away, its light rays have to move through more molecules of air before reaching our eyes. This makes shorter wavelength colors, like blue, scatter off in different directions, leaving the longest wavelength colors, like red and orange, to hit your eyes and create these beautiful scenes. As the sun half disappeared beyond the horizon, Grandpa set up his video camera, then called me over. "See here, my boy. The sun looks like it's sinking below the horizon, but by zooming in, we can prove it's really just moving away from us." As the camera zoomed, the half-disappeared sun became entirely visible again. Then, as it zoomed further, the sun rose higher and higher back into the sky. "You can do it with ships beyond the horizon, too," Grandpa said, pointing to a boat far off in the distance. "Watch as this one appears to sink hull first into the horizon. Pseudoscientists like your teacher, Mr. Tyson, have said for centuries that this is somehow proof that you are living on a ball. They say the horizon is the curvature of their ball Earth, and when ships or the sun move beyond it, that they have literally sunk beneath the ball. If that was true, then we could never zoom them back into view. But look here. That ship has now completely disappeared from view of our naked eyes. Yet with this newfangled technology, we can zoom the entire ship fully back into view, proving the horizon is not the curvature of their ball Earth, but rather just the vanishing line of your perspective." "Grandpa, what's a pseudoscientist?" I asked. Chuckling, he answered, "Pseudo means fake or false. A scientist is anyone who uses observation and experimentation to formulate logical conclusions about the natural world. So a pseudoscientist is a fake scientist, or someone who denies actual observation and experimentation in favor of fairy tale theories. You and I are real scientists, my boy," Grandpa exclaimed, taking a long spirit level from his truck and setting it upon a nearby beachside railing. "The pseudoscientists say the Earth is a big ball, 3,963 miles in radius, so we can use the Pythagorean theorem again to calculate the curvature that should exist according to them, which turns out to be 8 inches per mile squared. This means after 2 miles, the Earth should curve 32 inches, after 3 miles, 72 inches, and after 10 miles, the width of this here cove, the Earth should curve downwards a full 66 feet. Line your eyes up behind this railing and see for yourself. Does the horizon dip?" Observing the perfectly flat horizon from shore to shore, I shook my head. No. "Of course not. Grandpa smiled. "You will never see a curved horizon or curved water. It's called the horizon for good reason, because it's always perfectly horizontal. And it's called sea level because bodies of water at rest are always perfectly level. Whether it's in a beaker, a bottle, a bathtub, a pond, a lake, or an ocean, the natural physics of water and other liquids is to find and remain level. 70% of the world is covered in level water, so how could the earth not be flat? The idea that our level oceans are somehow curved around and stuck to the underside of a spinning space ball is the greatest deception in the history of mankind.